Good afternoon, everyone. I present to you the second session of the day, the Eastern Gate, where war exists. We have with us Sudeep Chakravarti. He is a writer of narrative non-fiction and fiction, analyst political and issues in India, a columnist and consultant media and Sudeep Chakravarti, published by Simon and Schuster, The Eastern Gate, War and Peace in Nagaland, Manipur, and India's Far East. He is the author of several other critically acclaimed and best-selling works of non-fiction, including Plassey, The Battle That Changed the Course of Indian History, The Bengalis, A Portrait of a Community, Red Sun, and Highway 39, and several novels and short stories. Sudeep Chakravarti will be in conversation with Samrat Choudhury. He is an author and journalist and a former editor of newspaper in India's major metropolises, Delhi, Mumbai, and Bangalore. His latest publication is The Braided River, a travelogue following the Brahmaputra, published by HarperCollins in 2021. We are looking forward to the session. Over to Samrat.
Thanks, Ritvina. And hi, welcome everyone to this afternoon's conversation. In a no pandemic world, we'd be sitting somewhere near Park Street, probably having a nice adda. But here we are on Zoom. And so this is very much a pandemic era event. Sudeep is also a bit under the weather, but work from home has its benefits, its silver linings. We can work from wherever we are, and we can probably have an audience from wherever you might be. So today we are here to talk about Sudeep's latest book, which I'm reading at present, and which is a fascinating read. It's a deeply researched look into Northeast India and mainly into two states, Nagaland and Manipur. And the title, as you can see, is The Eastern Gate, War and Peace in Nagaland, Manipur, and India's Far East. So congratulations again, Sudeep, and good to see you.
Thank you very much. Likewise.
Yeah. To start at the beginning, could you please tell us a little bit about the premise of the book and also the title? Why is it called The Eastern Gate? And why have you used India's Far East rather than Northeast?
Well, thank you for mentioning that, because these are my sort of you can call it a pet project or you can call it a pet peeve, all of the above. But very, very briefly, because I'm afraid we don't have too much time, I called it the Eastern Gate because, or rather, let me answer why the premise of the book. I think that was your first question. I mean, the premise of the book, Samrat, is that I believe that the far eastern region of India, which I refuse to call the Northeast because it's neither North, it's definitely the East, but it's not Northeast. I think that's in the old days, we decided to call it the Northeast. I think it's correctly India's Far East, because it is rather so far to the East that for 50 years and more, it was sort of disconnected from what I think is rightly called the mainland of India. I mean, if there is mainland China, let me assure you, my friend and ladies and gentlemen out there, that there is also such a construct as mainland India for the people from Far Eastern India. Anyway, so and there has been a sort of a huge disconnect right from the time of partition and thereafter. And I think I mean, this is something that I've written about in an earlier book called Highway 39. Where it's sort of, I laid the groundwork for essentially bringing to people in India as to why their brothers and sisters in Northeastern India, or what I'd like to call Far Eastern India, were often so upset with mainland India and its policies and seemed alienated or felt alienated because of being treated like non-Indians or being called Chinese or being asked at atrocities committed upon the people in Nagaland, in Manipur, in Mizoram, in Tripura, and elsewhere, even in Assam, and parts of Meghalaya as well, which was done simply because of non-acceptance of the fact that they were people out there, now close to 50 million of them. That's all that they were asking for. But I think in the throes of post-partition and post-independence nation building, it was a time when India was unable to or unwilling to accept that it was aspirations and dreams of people over there were answered by wholesale infusion of the army and bloodletting of a sort that would, I think, if there was a Nuremberg for what atrocities were committed by the Republic of India and Far Eastern India, then it would be of a very high order of homicidal culpability and war crime. I can show you about that. But we haven't come to that. What we have done is that we've had a papering over. We've had because of non-acceptance and non-understanding or non-acknowledgement of several of these things, we've had a spate of rebellions. In Assam, you've had so many rebellions. One or two groups are still extant. Manipur has the single largest number of rebel groups in India as we speak. Nagaland is in the middle of a ceasefire, which is not the same thing as absence, which is not the same thing as peace. It's merely the absence of war. And we'll come to that later, because I think it's a very, very hollow peace process that's over there. Tripura's barely come together. Mizoram's holding on, fortunately. Arunachal Pradesh is beginning to crack at the seams. And here, Samrat, this is happening in an area which, to my mind, is a geopolitical sweet spot to rival the so-called sexy geopolitical sweet spot in the Northwest, in what is called AFPAC, Afghanistan and Pakistan. Look, I mean, just consider it. Lhasa is closer to Guwahati than Kolkata. Look at the dynamics of the region. Mandalay is closer to Imphal than Mumbai. In that region, New Delhi and Beijing are both further away. Kolkata and Kunming are the closest cities. You could drive down for a day and drive down from Guwahati straight south to Shillong, further south to the border at Dauki, and cross over into Sylhet and go down to Dhaka, border controls permitting, within a day. This is the region we're talking about. This is the pivot for India's Look East policy, Act East policy. Now, if you don't have, this is the Eastern Gate, Samrat, and ladies and gentlemen, this is the Eastern Gate. This is the pivot for Mr. Narasimha Rao's Look East policy. This is the pivot for Mr. Modi's Act East policy, announced the year that he came to power in 2014 in November. In Myanmar, by the way, which is a neighboring country. Just imagine this whole region. You have Nepal, the Northwest, you have Bhutan, you have Tibet, autonomous region, China, Kunming, you have Myanmar, and you have Bangladesh to the west. Look at the geopolitical sweet spot that this is. And this is the Eastern Gate, which India is trying to leverage in order to develop the Northeastern India, the so-called Northeast of India, in order to reach Southeast Asia. The trade routes, the routes of commerce, the routes of people, movement of people, the routes to energy and communications pipelines, trade routes. This is the thriving region of the present and the future. This is the Eastern Gate. Yeah. And Manipur and Nagaland sit at the Eastern Gate. In fact, there is a saying in Meiteilon, which is the primary language of Manipur. There's a concept of the Eastern Gate and the Western Gate. And there is a saying that I heard from a very venerated old lady, Ima Mangol, many years ago when I was in Imphal. She alluded to the fact that, if basically what she was saying, that if India is not careful, this is what her allusion was, then India's Eastern Gate would shut, right, which effectively meant that Manipur and the East would close its Western Gate and would open their Eastern Gate. So it's not just a geographical thing, it's a geopolitical thing, it's a psychological thing. So the Eastern Gate is very much the gateway that exists not just in people's minds, but in reality too. And that's why the Eastern Gate. If you do not have peace, you do not have prosperity, you do not have a future. If India cannot guarantee peace in Nagaland and Manipur with the ongoing peace processes and guarantees peace throughout the region, it cannot deliver on the promise of prosperity throughout India's East, throughout India's Northeast,
Right.
Far East, throughout India's links with the mainland of India and onto Southeast Asia. None of it will fructify. None of it will fructify. And let alone the links between India and Bangladesh and onwards into Southeast Asia. None of it will fructify if there is no constructive, conclusive, respectable, dignified, and honorable peace as soon as possible.
And where is that process at? You've been following the peace process for a while. What's happening with it?
Well, not much, I can assure you, because, at least the Naga peace process, let me speak about the Naga peace process, because the Manipuri peace process is non-existent. There are no talks ongoing with the rebel construct in Manipur at all. India is pretty much happy going about banging the rebels, and the rebels are pretty much happy about coming back onto it, and the elections are coming in Manipur in the next few weeks, so you will see a lot of turmoil, I think, happening there for political reasons for both sides to gain political mileage from. But anyway, so let me come to the Naga peace process, which is central to this thing, because what most people don't realize, Samrat, is, as you would know well, is that people don't realize that the Naga peace process is not just about Nagaland, the state which came into being in 1963, as part of an earlier peace deal, which went to pieces, subsequent rebellions, and so on and so forth. The fact is that there are Naga people, there are Naga homelands in Nagaland, in Manipur, in Arunachal Pradesh, and southwestern Assam as well. Contiguous. These are all contiguous areas to Nagaland. Now, these are in excess of 2 million people. It's not a small sum. Several tribes. Now, you cannot have a Naga peace deal which only includes Nagaland. You must have a Naga peace deal which includes the Naga homelands. You must also have a Naga peace deal that includes all the rebel groups. You must have a Naga peace deal which brings the civil societies, the so-called civil society on board, like the Mizo peace deal, like the Mizoram Accord of 1986 and the Assam Accord, sort of kamsa there. But anyway, one tried over there. So nothing is happening there. I mean, you had a high octane optics on 3rd of August 2015 when Narendra Modi sort of hosted a meeting in New Delhi at the PM House in Racecourse Road, and had Twingalang Muiva, who's the chief of the key rebel construct, NSC and IM, National Socialist Council of Nagaland, Isaac Muiva, and the government of India, and the interlocutor R.N. Ravi. They came, shook hands, made little speeches, exchanged scarves, sort of spouted platitudes, and then got along with the process. It was immediately a hollow process, and I wrote it at the time, and it's in my book in great detail, because I've been fortunate to get a sort of a ringside view to it, is that there were fallacies right from the beginning. One is that you had to deal with one rebel group, even though it was a big rebel group. They're not the spokespersons for all the Naga people. I mean, they're not even... So you can't have a deal with one group. The governments of Nagaland were not party to the deal. The governments of Manipur were not party to the deal, nor were the people of Assam or Arunachal Pradesh, let alone, the people of Nagaland and Manipur were not party to the deal. So how can you have a peace process? So it was, I think, hollow to begin with. People made a big deal out of the framework agreement for peace. To my mind, it was a hollow deal because it was a framework agreement to reach an agreement. It wasn't an agreement. It was basically you were agreeing to have dialogue. You were not agreeing to come to an agreement. Right. So that was a fallacy. Then slowly, like false modesty to say that, I won't take credit for something like this. But it was logical. And if I, as a citizen of India, as an analyst, can think through this logic, then why couldn't the government of India, for heaven's sake? I mean, it just, that is how hollow it was. That's the point I'm trying to make. And where then you had some other groups coming into the picture. It got very messy because then IM got upset saying, why are we being sidelined? And then, but all kinds of things happened. Then it moved ahead, Samrat. Things did move ahead. I'm not going to criticize the deal out of hand. It did move ahead. There were lots of suggestions made. that, let's have a bicameral legislature in Nagaland to accommodate rebel leaders who will come into the mainstream. Let's take rebels after demobilizing. Let's integrate them into society. Let's do this. Let's do that. It's happened before. It's happened in Rwanda. It's happened in Nepal. It's happened in other places. I mean, conflict and conflict resolutions are sort of ebb and flow of the human condition, if you will. So it's not like it's a no-brainer. I mean, these things happen, but you have to do it the right way. So there were all kinds of things made, but I think what people didn't take into account is, and here the rebels are to be at fault as well, is that it's one thing to integrate the rebel armies into the, say, a paramilitary force, or to give them training or rehabilitation and so on and so forth. But what about the rebel leaders? Right now, because there's ceasefire, they have status quo where they run parallel administrations with the full complicity of the governments of India, Nagaland, Manipur, Assam, and Arunachal Pradesh. It's a bizarre situation in that area. They run a parallel administration. They control elections. They extort from people in the name of national identity. It's happening out there. Now, the rebel leaders, I think, would be put out. I mean, they have a cushy life right now. They're party to enormous wealth and enormous influence, and they can retain weapons. They can train. They can arm themselves. Just imagine a ceasefire, Samrat, a bizarre ceasefire, approved by the government of India, no less, that permits a rebel group to continue to recruit, train, arm, and extort and run a parallel administration in the name of peace. I mean, where do you see this? Not even with FARC in Colombia. I get my blood boils when I see things like this. So when you have such a situation, you're going to have an implosion. You're going to have people delaying it because there are vested interests. Yeah. People like the economy of conflict more than they like the economy of peace. It's a very brutal truth. And now you have a situation where there are entrenched politicians in Manipur, entrenched politicians in Nagaland and elsewhere. Are they going to be welcoming the rebel leadership into their thing? And you know how corrupt these regimes are. Our elected democratic regimes in these states. Are they going to be letting in other power structures within them? You need an immense level of maturity, Samrat, as you well know, in order to arrive at a peace deal. Like in Mizoram in 1986, the serving chief minister of Mizoram, right, Lalthanawala, of the Congress party, actually stepped down in order to welcome the leader of MNF, the rebel group Laldenga, to come in, right, and take over chief ministership. Right. That was the generosity of purpose and vision and future with which people acted at that time. Do the current politicians of Nagaland, Manipur, and elsewhere, government of India, have the maturity to give this much to the future, to sacrifice both the rebel leadership and the political leadership? Right. The civil society do, but do these leadership structures have the maturity to look to the future in this way and come to conflict resolution? I'm not so sure, because if they did, peace would have already come to pass. We've been at this process since formally, very, very formally, in this sort of showbiz manner, since 3rd of August 2015, from the self-professed administrative genius that post-independence India has seen, right? Allegedly or professedly. And now we're in 2022. This 3rd of August 2022, it will have been 7 years since this high-profile, high-optics framework agreement was signed. And where are we? We are nowhere right now. It's still this peace, which is merely the absence of war. And the state is suffering, the citizens are suffering. And I'll end by just making one point, is that people also forget that because of the Naga homelands in Manipur, you have to think of the people in Manipur who are non-Naga, who are paranoid that a Naga peace deal will mean that the Naga homelands in Manipur will be integrated into a future mega Nagaland or a mega Naga homeland. And they are absolutely loath to think that they will be losing territorial the territorial integrity, as they fond of using the word, of Manipur. And so you have to tread lightly. But where is but people are trying, people are reaching out. There are compromises being made. There are peace offerings being made. Development is being spoken of, but not clearly, conclusively enough, not clearly, convincingly enough for a peace process to move forward. It is all mired in politics. It's mired in optics. It's mired in obfuscation, misdirection, and a heck of a lot of smoke and mirrors, and a lot of lying.
Right.
So that's where it is.
Okay.
The peace process. That's where it is.
Okay. Well, that doesn't sound too good for the peace process. But maybe there might be. Let me play devil's advocate, and let me say that there might be another way of looking at it. For many years, we kept hearing about the integration, the so-called integration into the national mainstream of Northeast India. And politically, right now, we are at a place where, for example, we have BJP governments all across the Northeast. So, and Assam especially is, it's starting to sound a bit like Uttar Pradesh sometimes. So, would you say that, this is a victory for the idea of Hindi, Hindu, Hindustan, and therefore a victory for the sort of idea of mainstreaming and national integration and the end of separatism?
I don't know what this nationalism and separatism business is all about in the first place. I mean, I think these are isms in any case, and these are tricky things because I'm not even going to the area where that cliche and the hoary cliche about one person's rebel is another person's freedom fighter. I'm not even going into that kind of sort of romantic claptrap. Okay, and let me just say it outright. I mean, sometimes it can it can be cause-led, it can be whatever, but it can be also a lot of bollocks at a lot of times. And it's not like the establishment is not always right. It's not always wrong. The rebel construct is not always right, and it's not always wrong. And both are speaking from the barrel of the gun. Both are speaking from the barrel of the gun usually. So these are hoary constructs to begin with. But when you're talking about separatism, people are not trying to separate in order to make themselves feel good about life. They are reaching out for basic needs. They're looking for dignity, development, and a livelihood. You look at the root of every rebellion in India and definitely in the Northeast, you will find that is the issue. You had the Bodo rebellion, I think, in Assam, but the Bodos were not rebelling against India. Who were the administrators of the Bodo territories? The government of Assam, right? So as far as I'm concerned, that the Bodo liberation enterprise was actually a rebellion and the first step against the government of Assam, or the misgovernance of the government of Assam. And then it goes out of control, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You had the Mizo rebellion. When Mizoram went into rebellion, it was a part of Assam. It was not independent. It became independent in 1986. It was the Lushai Hills, then it became the Mizo Hills of Assam, Mizo Hills district of Assam. So it was a misgovernance, to my mind, on the part of the government of Assam of the day. Of that day, not today, of that day, those days, which led to a complete amount of misgovernance and misunderstanding and arrogance, which led to a flowering of the Mizo rebellion. So, these are localized things, and I would say the Naga situation, the Manipur situation, so on and so forth. So here you have a continuing arrogance, if you will, which has gone from these local situations to the national situation, because India has now taken over everything. And there is this broad brushing of policies, there's a broad brushing of attitudes. To the extent that Manipur is supposed to be a part of Mahabharata. So, I actually facetiously call N. Biren Singh, who's the chief minister of Manipur right now, the Mahabharata man, because he's like the leading edge of the Sangh Parivar project in Manipur, where, Ulupi, the princess, is supposed to be from Manipur. What rubbish are people talking about? So you have this sort of grand concept, this grand. It began with a whitewashing, and now you have a sort of a saffron washing of histories of the entire northeast of India in order to integrate itself into the so-called national mainstream. And you have, I mean, as we speak, the Sarsam Chalak of RSS is in Manipur right now. What is he doing in Manipur? I mean, it's not Nagpur. He's in Imphal right now. He's today he's in Moirang, raising the flag of on behalf of the grateful nation to commemorate Subhash Chandra Bose's 125th birth anniversary. So these are the sort of the political, tools, if you will, and I use that word advisedly. These are the sort of political tools and the tool makers and the tool wielders and the tools, if you will, who walk around town and sort of whitewash, want to impose on entire regions and ideology and a construct. Peace is not going to come from that, Samrat, because, you're not going to be coming to a sort of a conflict resolution by getting people in Assam, in Manipur, in Nagaland, Arunachal, in Tripura, in Mizoram, and Manipur, and Meghalaya, and Sikkim, to acknowledge that this great construct of India and Bharat Mata and the Sangh and Mahabharat is the way to go for opening the Eastern Gate to India's peace and prosperity to the future. It will come when you acknowledge local histories and identities and dignities and local needs of livelihoods, which is what gave rise to the rebellions in the first place. This is a very logical construct. It is not an illogical construct. The problem has been that India has illogically tried to impose its will on people and regions and places without respecting and acknowledging that these people and these places have their own needs.
Right.
That is what the Republic of India is all about, or that is what any republic is about. That is what democracy is about. Right. That is what the democratic norm is about. This is the core. So I'm concerned, and sorry, you were saying. I didn't want to interrupt you.
No, you mentioned Biren just now in passing, the chief minister, and also elections in Manipur. So can we talk a little bit about both of these, the forthcoming elections for starters? I think a lot of people might be interested in your sort of reading of what you expect as a likely outcome in these elections.
Okay. Before I go there, can I just read you a little passage about what a Naga general told me about when I asked him about what his views were. And people don't always realize how important the Naga construct is in Manipur, or how volatile Manipur is ethnically. That it's not just the Manipuri people are, of the state maybe, but there are the Naga people, they're the Meitei people who are the majority in Manipur. They're the Nagas, they're the Kuki, they're the Mar, they're the Zomi, the flip of Mizo, if you will. There are smaller tribes and sub-tribes and identities. It's a vast sort of it's literally a melting pot, and you can't sort of brazen policy through it's not a homogeneous kind of place. It's a heterogeneous place. Yeah. And anyway, so this is what it is. And I'll quickly come to you from it. It's a short passage, so indulge me. It's the second chapter in the first part of the book. And the chapter is called There Won't Be a Manipur. And this conversation happens in Kohima, where I'm talking to a former deputy chief of NSC and IM. And he and I are having a sort of a tete-a-tete, in a drawing room of a friend. And we're talking about peace and conflict resolution, what could come to pass, what needs to be done, so on and so forth. And this is, and it'll tell you why, and it'll sort of buttress my point, which I made earlier, about how it is very important to acknowledge the Naga presence in Manipur and the Meitei and the non-Naga sentiments about that Naga presence, and how the whole Naga peace process can devolve into favoring one side or the other, and the concerns and the paranoias, and sometimes the justified paranoias about what a future peace could bring. So it's a very, very important, very sensitive aspect. So I just want to give you a little glimpse, because, I'm sitting in my home in Goa at this point of time. You're sitting in your home in Kolkata. Our friends who are listening in could be all over India and all over the world. We don't always get a sense of what the dynamics and the sentiments of how people who actually live and have fought for this region actually feel. So here's a small glimpse. So it's called There Won't Be a Manipur, the chapter. The middle-aged Naga rebel looks out of the window. Hard rain masks the jade green hills in this unspoiled northern suburb of Kohima. It's a tranquil afternoon in early August. We're at the home of a mutual acquaintance, sharing tea and conversation. The former deputy chief of NSC and IM's army glances at the Walther PPK handgun on a table by his side. For some minutes, he had inspected the Walther, a wedding gift to our acquaintance from the faction's army chief at the time, Pumping Shimran. Our host had brought it out from a safe to briefly show it off and kept the weapon by the tea service before leaving the room. Ramkathing Vara opens and inspects the emptied magazine, slides it back in, thumbs off the safety, primes the slide, aims down the barrel at the teakwood bookshelf at the end of the room, and pulls the trigger. Click. It is all fluid motion that lasts seconds. He gently replaces the Walther on the table and responds to my query about what could happen if a political understanding isn't reached about securing the Naga homelands in Manipur. Manipur nathaki jabo, he tells me in Nagamese. There won't be a Manipur. More precisely, there won't be a Manipur as we know it. According to Vara, it's a possible outcome of one of the deadliest games of political chess being played in India. So, there you have it. It's just a tiny, tiny thing. And here you have a situation where every time there's an election in Manipur, every time there's an election in India, if it's a parliamentary election, then it's all across India. When it's assembly elections, whether it's in Nagaland or Manipur, in this particular case, it's Manipur, the rebel construct and any rebel construct, whether it's the Kuki construct or the Naga construct or the Meitei construct, they will leverage, they will try to leverage the political situation by saying, you do it our way, boycott elections, or this must be the agenda, this is the future, this is not the future. And on the other side, depending on which party is in play, you will have, say Biren Singh's predecessor, Ibobi Singh, who was of the Congress, and then with Biren Singh, who's of the BJP. Both their aim seems to be to balance out the Naga peace process and sort of play up to the gallery. For the BJP, for Biren Singh, who's the BJP chief minister, heavily supported by the BJP superstructure. I mean, the RSS chief is in Manipur, right, as we speak. So, and so on and so forth, where they're in a sort of a balancing act. I mean, why, for instance, there isn't a Naga peace right now? Because BJP hasn't figured out a way to soothe or assuage the Meitei concern. And if they do not assuage the Meitei concern, then they lose the Meitei vote. It's as simple as that. It's like it's 2 + 2 literally. So there's always been this balancing act. Okay, we'll give the Nagas this, but what will the Meitei think? There are 40 seats in the Manipur in the Manipur Assembly, which are in the plains of Manipur, which is the most populated part of Manipur. So for demographic purposes, it has 40 seats, and the hills of Manipur have 20 seats. The plains of Manipur is the home to the majority ethnic group of Manipur and the majority people of Manipur, the Meitei. The hills, which have 20 seats in Manipur, 60-seat assembly, are of the Naga, belong. I'll say belong because it's sort of the constituencies are sort of ST constituencies, the tribal constituency, the designated constituency. They're not general constituencies. Belong to the Naga, the Kuki, and the Zomi people in the other district, the hill districts of Manipur. So are you going to have a Naga peace process right now where the BJP government in the center and the BJP government in the Manipur is going to go out and say, hello, our Naga brothers and sisters, we believe in your peace. And yes, we believe in your future and let's live together. And you can have an autonomous Naga homeland in Manipur, which belongs to territorial Manipur, but you're administratively autonomous, like a autonomous hill district, say Karbi Anglong in Assam, or so on and so forth, right? You think they'll have the guts to go ahead with something like that, the courage? They will think they will lose the elections. Rioting might erupt, violence might erupt.
Yeah.
So these are the kind of games people play, Samrat. And I don't see the Naga peace process happening in a hurry. I mean, they've been promising the conclusion to this peace process for the last 3 Christmases. And now we're getting to 2022 Christmas, and it's probably going to happen. When is it going to happen now? Every time something happens, there's a model code of conduct. You think Biren Singh and Manipur are going to go in and give in to any peace process right now? They're not even talking to the Metis rebels, for heaven's sake. The majority ethnicity to which this rebel group belongs, and they have this sort of structure called CORCOM, Core Communication, construct of 6 major Metis rebel groups. They're not even talking peace to their own people, if I may say so. So it's all very messy, and it's all very opportunistic, and it's all very expedient. And I don't think that the people of Manipur or Nagaland or any other state that is involved within this peace process have any faith in it. I mean, they see it as the hoodwinking that it is.
Right.
And how much are people going to be hoodwinked? I think it's time to call it what it is, to call the peace process what it is. It's a lot of bollocks. I mean, I have no problems using expletives to describe the peace process. I've used more elegant words in my book, as you know. But when I'm speaking face to face, and and these are people, flesh and blood people with aspirations somewhere.
Yeah.
These are citizens of India, which you bulldozed and butchered over decades in order to claim themselves as your own.
Right.
And now you will not come together, either the government or the rebel, both sides who profess to fight for the citizens or the people of their claimed ethnicity and their faiths. And if they will not come together for their future, who are they bullshitting?
Right.
Who are they fooling? Who are they hoodwinking?
Right.
I think that this needs to be called, and called forcefully. And I've tried to do that in my book.
I have a lot of questions, and there's so much more that we can talk about, but time has flown, and we are now at a very little time. So what I'm going to do is, I think we have several questions. I think we can take a few of those. So I'll just read out maybe a couple, and you can take them in any order that you want.
All right.
So one of the questions from an audience question from Anirudh Mishra is about AFSPA. And he's saying AFSPA remains amongst the many legacy acts from colonial times. Its history in states across the Northeast has been, as you say, an emotional trigger owing primarily to its continuous enactment. In view of recent events, there is growing clamor in the region to repeal it. Do you think this is a possibility in our near future?
You mean to repeal AFSPA? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Is there a possibility to repeal AFSPA?
Yeah.
I don't think AFSPA will be repealed unless the government of India sees political benefit in it. I mean, you have a statement from the Chief Minister of Manipur from last week, N. Biren Singh, who actually said, I believe AFSPA should be lifted. So I'm paraphrasing him here, but I also believe in nation first. So what does that mean? He believes that his people, it is unjust that AFSPA is imposed in Manipur, but he's so beholden to the government of India that, it's nation first. So it's not Manipur first, though he's the Chief Minister of Manipur. And here, to lift AFSPA will bring benefit to the people of Manipur, will bring emotional peace to the people of Manipur, the people whom he is the Chief Minister of. But here he's putting AFSPA, which is an act of impunity and immunity, which has had no benefit whatsoever. And this is a matter of record in quelling rebellion or rebellion in any part of India since its imposition in 1958. It's a matter of record. It's the truth. And the act continues. So I don't think that the act will be removed, because the act is imposed, it is implemented when an area is declared a disturbed area under Section 3 of the AFSPA, right? Which says that the area has to be first declared a disturbed area, and then AFSPA is extended for another 6 months.
Right.
Now in Manipur, the Home Department of Manipur goes ahead and declares Manipur and disturbed area year after year after year, and AFSPA is extended. Nagaland is entirely under AFSPA, and this is a state, which has ceasefire with all the rebel groups. So where's the war? I mean, but there's AFSPA. So, unless there is political benefit that is seen by the political masters of the land, and here I mean the state as well as the state capital state as in the center, I don't think AFSPA will be removed. And here I will actually, contrary to my natural instinct in this particular case, in terms of AFSPA, it is difficult to ignore I'm not taking the side of Indian Army absolutely on AFSPA. In fact, I'm critical of Indian Army's application of AFSPA myself, and on record and in the book. But when the army says that, don't use us then for law and order, take us out. The minute you take us out from policing duties and law and order duties and engage us into doing what we're supposed to do, is protect India's borders. Look at China and look at other areas, as the army chief said 2 days ago. Then we don't need AFSPA. You don't need the army. So you don't need AFSPA. Why are you making the army do the policing job? Why are you making the army firefight for your policy failures? There is logic to this. So it is extremely complex, this question. But I don't think AFSPA, my friend Anirudh, will go soon unless there is political will. At the political level, not at the level of the people. The people don't want it at all. It is very, very clear. And it doesn't need an atrocity like what happened in Nagaland or what's happened in Imphal over and over again, or all over Northeast to recur in order for this demand to keep coming up. To repeal AFSPA 2022.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, unfortunately, we're pretty much almost out of time.
We can take another
passage. One small
question. I'm sure. I'm sure we can take another.
One question. Okay, fine. One more question.
Yeah. I'm sure we're good for another question.
Yeah.
Just do it.
Yeah. So there's a question from Purnima Saxena, which says, in the geopolitics of our region, does the Northeast, neighbored by key players like China, Myanmar, Bangladesh, remain largely peripheral in our strategic/economic policy? Is the Act East policy enough of a response to it?
I didn't get it very clearly, but is the Act East policy? Could you repeat that?
So in the geopolitics of our region, does the Northeast, which has China, Myanmar, Bangladesh as neighbors, remain largely peripheral in our strategic and economic policy? And is the Act East policy enough of a response to it?
Well, that's a very good question. I think it remained peripheral. Every time China pops into the picture, it doesn't become peripheral at all. It becomes very much a part of the game. And in fact, the response, and it's not necessarily Act East policy, but generally because of China, India has reoriented a lot of its sort of defense capabilities towards the Northeast than ever in the past before. I mean, there are missile emplacements in Eastern India now that they were not before, and in Northeast India. Frontline fighters have been moved to air bases in Assam. For instance, the Sukhoi Mk-30I have two bases in the eastern aspect of Assam, Tinsukia and Chabua, if I'm not wrong. And the 3 Corps, which is in Dimapur, the 3 Corps of the army, which is in Dimapur, which in fact overlooks, which as a crow flies is directly in sight, line of sight from the headquarters of NSC and IM in Camp Hebron, southwest of Dimapur. That is tasked with looking after China. So strategically, there has been a focus that has taken, a great kind of emphasis into looking at the Northeast as a strategic bridgehead, for sure. Myanmar, the top commanders of the Indian Army and Indian intelligence services make regular trips to Myanmar in order to liaise with the top echelons of Myanmar in order to protect Indian geostrategic interests. It's been happening for several years now. from the time that before Aung San Suu Kyi became head of state and was deposed and so on and so forth. That's remained a constant. Okay, but in terms of the economic benefit, I don't think that, except it's only now becoming apparent that it's hugely conscious, like the energy resources of Myanmar and transshipping them into Northeast India, the energy resources of Tripura, all kinds of things, the waterways, the economic corridors, the possibilities. The Asian Highways 1 and Asian Highways 2 run from Myanmar through Northeast India, through Bangladesh, into Eastern India, and all the way across to the edge of Europe. So, on paper, there are many constructs which are very, very clear. And I think that Look East policy and the Act East policy is basically a change of nomenclature from Look East to Act East. Look East didn't mean that you wouldn't act East. And Act East didn't mean that you wouldn't look East. I mean, just like the Modi government's way of changing existing policies to give it a new flavor. So to all credit to the government for recognizing that and pushing for it, but they do it with the politics of the region in mind, because there is some superstructure behind it as well. So when you start thinking about India and you start thinking about the region, then you begin to have a cohesive Look East policy and an Act East policy, which includes the people of Far Eastern India. You cannot have an Act East policy by overlooking Northeastern India. It's as simple as that. So Act East policy needs to integrate Far Eastern India into the project, into the plan, include the people of Northeast India, but have them buy into the Act East policy. And then you have the Act East policy, and then you have the Eastern Gate. And it's up to the people of the Eastern Gate whether they want to open that gate for you or not. That remains the crucial point from the beginning to the end. If the people of the Eastern Gate don't want to open the gate, then you haven't given them a good enough reason to do so. And you must therefore work harder in order to convince them, in order to give what they're looking for, which is livelihood, reassurances, dignity, respect. That has always been the issue.
Right. Well, thanks a lot, Sudeep. I mean, time has really flown by, and I think we are completely out of time. I'm getting messages that the next session is about to start soon. So thank you to everyone, and well, see you around.
Yes. Stay well, stay safe.